From the racing capital of the world, Indianapolis, Indiana, welcome to Season 7 of the greatest spectacle in podcasting, the Seventh Gear Overrev Show. As always, I am your host, Kevin Krause, and this week's episode is brought to you by our great friends and partners over at RespectYourPackage.com, makers of those fantastic high-end men's briefs with ball bustier technology. They are respectfully scandalous yet unapologetic, not to mention our good friends and partners over at Krause Meats with their expanded list of offerings. They're going to be growing their beef jerky side of things. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but we appreciate both of those companies' support for this program to bring you this fantastic content. Now, Seventh Gear Overrev fans, I know we've had a little bit of a layoff here at the end of 2025 and through the holidays, but we're going to get rolling here in a big way into 2026 because we've got fantastic shows, fantastic guests. Like today's guest is an amazing guy. We actually got to know each other through a group that we belong to, the Society of Professional Motorsports Journalists. But this guy, I'm telling you what, aside from being a huge motorsports fan and the Indy 500 in particular, which will be a big topic of conversation today, but this guy is literally the master of the pivot. He has done everything from corporate finance to electronics. The dude's a cancer survivor. He plays in a band. He writes books. He's written multiple books. This guy is the bon vivant of he's the kind of everything that I think I want to be at some point as I grow up. So without any further ado, my new friend of the show, author, racing fan extraordinaire, the one and only Mr. Ray Hartjen. Ray, welcome to Seventh Gear Overrev, man. Thanks for making the time to come on today.
Kevin, thank you for that great introduction, man. I need you as like my hype person wherever I go, and it's like, you can just come in right before me. Thank you for that warm introduction, and I'm super stoked to be on the Seventh Gear Overrev. Thanks so much for having me. I do appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to chat with you again. I mean, it's only been a week, but geez, there's still a lot of stuff for us to talk about since the last time we spoke.
No kidding, right? I mean, I know we kind of focused a lot of our conversation on the IndyCar stuff, and even since that conversation, I feel like the end of last week was like one breaking news story after another there as the week finished out. But before we get into all that, I mean, you've written a number of books, and the latest one being this great Indy 500 book that I love. And I don't know, by the way, Seventh Gear Overrev fans, you heard me mention that Ray and I are both members of the Society of Professional Motorsports Journalists. That's how we connected. And Ray, I don't know if you had a chance to look back at the post in the website, but you're sending an autographed case of books to Fisher's Elementary School, which is literally not even 10 minutes from my house. Talk about a small world. How did you make that connection?
Well, I went to high school. My father was a career Army officer. And, part of my high school experience was in Indianapolis. I went to Lawrence Central High School my freshman and sophomore year. Belzer Junior High, I believe is what it was called, before that. So I have some Indianapolis roots. And, one of the impetuses and the catalyst for writing the book, actually, even before that, it was a catalyst for me being a race fan to begin with, was a book I picked up as an elementary school student. Kevin, do you remember those Scholastic America catalogs?
Oh boy, do I ever. That just means I'm old.
These paper thin, almost like tissue paper type of, pages. Only a couple of pages, but inside those Scholastic America catalogs that your teacher would pass around were these gems, man. You could get posters and things like that, but really the emphasis was on books. And I discovered this beauty of a book. It was called The Indy 500 30 Days in May, written by Hal Higdon. And, I'd always, known about the Indianapolis 500. My mother grew up in Houston, Texas, and my uncle had occasions to bump into A.J. Foyt. And so, we were A.J. Foyt fans, and we kind of, I kind of understood the 500. But, being like a third grader or fourth grader, something like that, when I picked up that book, I mean, it was awesome. This book was a chronicle of the 1970 Indy 500. And, reading it like in 72 or 73, thereabouts, racing drivers at that point in time were kind of like astronauts, right? It was, unbelievably dangerous sport, but there was this huge event with all the history that was associated with it. And it just captivated my imagination as a young reader. And I became a passionate fan, not only of the sport, but of the event, the Indy 500. And, look at this. This is actually a retro copy. This is not the original copy of my 30 Days in May. It's actually a reprint that I picked up off Amazon a handful of years ago. I poured through that book, Kevin, like, 3-4 times a year for a decade. I've read that book at least 25 times. I love that book. And I always wanted to write a book but to update that. And, like I said, that book was a chronicle of the 1970 race. I wanted to update it, and what about, a book about a current race? And, a bunch of things have happened in my life. One of them you talked about is cancer survivorship. I am a cancer patient, and it's this idea of like, if not now, when, and I wanted to write this book. This book came about. I still have some of these, connections in Indianapolis. I put it out to, some people through Facebook. It's like, hey, anybody have any ties with elementary schools in the Indianapolis area? Sure enough, a woman I went to high school with, her next door neighbor's a fourth grade teacher at Fishers Elementary. So, I became, I got into contact with Miss Harris, and today shipping off a case of signed books for her students. And I hope I do my job with the book and I convert, or I bring at least a handful of those readers into, the spectacle that is the Indy 500. It's the thing I look forward to most every year.
It's so interesting. I find, in just hearing that story from you, Ray, and I feel like everybody that has this special affinity for the 500 had some sort of event, and it doesn't have to be, a life-altering, life-shattering event, but it just could be the experience. Like for me, my grandfather used to do all the timing and scoring at State Fair Park in Milwaukee, so I was getting smuggled into the back gate, before I can even remember. But that wasn't the thing that set the hook for me. He took me down to the Speedway, and we lived in Milwaukee at the time, for the first time ever when I was 10 years old. This was 1975. So obviously I'm dating myself, but back then when you're a little kid, like you said, these guys were like astronauts. They were superheroes. They were larger than life. And then when you go, and back then you could walk right up to the catch fencing, in turn one, and you could stand right at the retaining wall there. And I distinctly remember seeing Tom Sneva coming off of turn four, and all I could see was the top of his helmet, because that's just as much that's stuck up over the concrete wall. And then as soon as I thought I heard him right in front of me and I turned my head to see him go past me, he was already in turn two. And it just raised the hair on my arms and on the back of my neck. And man, for all those cool things like astronaut, policeman, fireman, football player, whatever, that at that moment, that was sort of that experience for me. I'm like, this is the deal right here. There's nothing.
Yeah, and I don't need to tell the audience that your audience is already hooked on motorsports, right? But when I'm talking to more of a general audience through podcast and radio and the like, I have to tell them auto racing's not for everybody, but don't discount it as like, oh, just a bunch of left turns or something like that. If you're looking at an oval track, for example, do yourself a favor and go. I tell these people, go to, it doesn't have to be the Indianapolis 500, it doesn't have to be the Monaco Grand Prix. Go to the sprint car race at the dirt track, 45 minutes away from where you live, and just experience it and decide for yourself. But don't, just don't look at TV. I know there's a tendency, particularly with NASCAR coverage, a 1.5 mile oval kind of looks like a 1.5 mile oval wherever it's at, right? And with, almost 40 NASCAR races, I can see that, the person who's not even a casual fan of motorsports will look at it and say, oh, it's all the same. It's the same old, but it's not, and so I know your audience already knows that it's sensory overload going to the track and checking it out. And, for me, it's not really the speed. And, I was just at a book fair not that long ago, and a question from the audience member during my panel was like, what makes a good race car driver? I really had to, there's a lot of things that kind of go into that question, right? But ultimately, the difference between a great racing driver and a good racing driver is their competitive edge, right? They want to win. Doesn't matter how fast they're going. Doesn't matter how slow they're going. As long as they hit that checkered flag first. That's really the separator. The sport's been filled with people that kind of had that Tom Cruise, Top Gun. I feel the need for speed. Those guys might be racing drivers, but they're not really the best racing drivers. Racing drivers just refuse to lose, right?
Well, that's exactly right. Now, if you pose that question to me purely as a driver, as I do when I'm teaching, my students, whether it's with Mercedes on the AMG side of things or Porsche or, private coaching and stuff, I'm like, the difference between the goods and the greats are their ability to use the brake pedal. But that's driver speak there. But when it comes to a more macro look at it, like you're saying, there's one glaring example right now that I can think of that speaks exactly to your point about that will to win and kind of getting into that groove, and that's Alex Palou right now.
Mhm.
That dude is on a hot streak that the only one that can beat him, I think, is himself right now. And he only had that one chink in his armor last year. And I brought this up at Content Days last week when he made that mistake at Mid Ohio, and
Yeah.
Scott Dixon kind of made him pay for it. But yeah, you're 100% right. It's, no matter what. And that's one of the things that, adores us to the likes of AJ Foyt's and the Mario Andretti's. Now granted, times are a little bit different because back then you didn't have so many other things competing for your attention. But
Mhm.
one of the things that I love so much too about the sport, and I've come to appreciate even more, and I know you have too, especially with the books that you've written, is yes, TV doesn't necessarily do it justice. For the casual fan, they might, kind of lose interest, but it's about the stories to be told, right? The
Yeah.
stories that oftentimes don't get told. And you do a masterful job of that with any of your books. The story about the Steelers and how they saved Pittsburgh, or your espionage book behind you there, Outflanked, and the Indy 500. And that's one of the things, and this is why another reason why I so appreciate having you on today is one of the things I'm trying to do here is to do a little bit deeper dive into the whole IndyCar community, to be able to tell some of these stories, right?
Yeah.
Everything that builds up to not only making the 500 but being able to get a seat in the sport. Like, what must Connor Daly be dealing
Yeah.
with right now, being so close to having the seat? And now it looks like Roman Grosjean's coming back and taking the last coin seat. And how are the new rookies going to do? Now you got Mick Schumacher coming over from WEC and from F1. So it's like those stories that you do a fantastic job in the book. And yes, I wasn't kidding. I told you I do have a copy of the book right here. um, Made
Yeah.
sure I was representing here.
There are so many stories, and even like a serious fan, they're not sometimes always aware of the different stories. I mean, just there's the casual fan kind of centers on the driver really, but it's really a team sport. And then all the stories that get to just one event, but knowing that an event is more than just the event, right? And there's a bunch of stories just that go through like a typical IndyCar stop, just Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and all the work that gets that takes place to go through practice, learn, get better for qualifying, qualify for the race, go through the race. And then that knowing that that's just one component of a season long, what have you learned, say, at an event at Long Beach that, might be able to transfer, particularly being a street course to, a street course event in Washington, D.C. Later on in the season. So, all these different pieces that kind of come together and all these different stories. And it's, every day there's a new story. And within that day, there are so many, different teams and the different personalities that are associated with it. That was one of the fun things about, creating this, the Indy 500 book, is that, it's more than just the race. The race probably, the race itself, I guess, as far as page count, probably takes up maybe 20% of the book. But, the rest of it is that, year long type of, all the trying to touch on the stories and the personalities, the drivers, the teams, the organization, the speedway itself, and, get ultimately to the, the event. And then, by golly, for people like you and I, Kevin, the checker flag flies and we can hardly wait till next year. It starts all over
I
again,
know.
right?
That's exactly right. And as well as I do, Ray, it's like, every IndyCar driver and team season is based around the Indy 500. Yeah, they talk about the Astra Cup and the championship being, the big prize, but I guarantee you any one of those guys, even if they're a part-timer, a one-off driver, they would trade everything for that one spot on that Borg Warner trophy.
Just drivers and teams, they can always, they can talk about every race is, the championship's important. And I don't believe it. And we've had people in the past even talk about it, like, I'll definitely trade a championship for an Indy 500 victory. I definitely trade another championship for another Indy 500 victory. It's the Indy 500 is it's the most important race in the world, not just for an
Right.
IndyCar driver or anyone.
Well, that's right, because if you win the Indy 500, you are forever immortal, right? If you win the IndyCar championship, nobody's going to remember who that was 5 years down the line. They'd have to look in the record books to know. But,
Yeah.
People will say, oh, yeah, I know Mario Andretti won it. I know AJ Foyt won it. I know Joseph Newgarden won it. They can name names, but they can't name champions all the time. unless
Yeah,
you're
and
Alex
you
Palou,
know,
I guess, or maybe Scott
ask
Dixon.
some ask someone like Michael Andretti. When I was talking about competitors, and it kind of really dawned on me as a fan. Remember the disgust that Michael Andretti would get out of his car when he finished second. I remember that one race in Portland when he ran out of fuel and his dad Mario nipped him at the finish line, and he's like. He's in the winner's circle. I'm like, well, happy Father's Day, I guess, because it was Father's Day.
Yeah,
And
that's right. I remember
but
that.
but just the disgust that Michael would have. You talk about being first loser, the second place. And that was on any race. And he's one of the, he's mentioned in the book, because you can't talk about the Indy 500. And this my book, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it details the running of the 2024 race. And Marco Andretti was a participant in that race. And so when Marco gets named to come back as a driver for another shot at the 500, you can't talk about Marco Andretti without talking about the Andretti family, right, and their history at the Speedway. And you look at like Michael Andretti, and I don't know if there's a more hard luck story. I mean, people will throw out names like Lloyd Ruby and Joe Leonard, and there's plenty of hard luck stories when it comes to Indianapolis 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but. And I think Michael Andretti led something like 441 laps at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. That's 11th on the all-time list. All 10 people above him have won at least one Indy 500, and all 10 people below him on the lap leader board have won an Indy 500. It's just Michael sitting there. So yeah, if anyone ever wants, and he's got plenty of IndyCar championships. If anybody ever wants to, the truth around whether would you trade an IndyCar championship for an Indy 500, I think Michael might be the good person to ask.
Yeah, I think that statistic about him being 11th on the all-time lap led list is probably an ignominious stat that nobody wants to have, and one that he's probably not going to be all that proud of. But so
Yeah, it
I
was like
want to
Nico
ask you,
Hulkenberg.
Ray.
It was like Nico Hulkenberg's streak, but podium streak in Formula One, right? It's like this is maybe the record I don't want to have, right?
I know it was almost like I was excited for him to finally get that podium, but at the same time, it was like this is bringing the end to a really not such a great lead up to this.
Yeah, I was kind of torn myself because I'm a Tifosi, member of the Tifosi. I'm a Ferrari fan. I fly the Ferrari flag up front of my house every Formula One weekend. And Lewis Hamilton finished fourth, trying to chase down Nico in Silverstone last year. So I would have liked to have had a Ferrari podium, but felt good for the guy. He certainly paid his dues, right? He's a great racer.
He sure has. He sure has. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But I want to ask you a little bit more about the book, Ray. This book in particular, the Indy 500 book. So when, obviously you mentioned, how much of an influence that book from the Scholastic catalogs impacted your view of things. When was it that you said, other than this just being kind of a thought in your head, that you kind of wanted to sort of recreate that book in modern times? But when did you finally say, okay, I'm actually going to do this? And from that point, how long did it take to come to print?
Yeah, great question. To answer that question, I have to kind of go back a little bit in history. That is, in 2019, I was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma is an incurable blood cancer, but it's treatable and manageable. So, I undergo treatment. I'll have chemotherapy tomorrow for my cancer. But when I first was diagnosed, Kevin, I knew what was going to happen. Probably was that I was going to go through a stem cell transplant. And that was going to be like 3 to 6 months, my doctor told me. And I'm like, all right, 3 to 6 months. I am going to be the most, receptive cancer patient in the history of stem cell transplants. I'm going to, work out. I'm going to be great physical condition. I'm going to, my nutrition's going to be there and all this. And so I go off to work to be the best cancer patient ever. And about 10, 11 days later, I'm sitting in a restaurant, a P.F. Chang's with my wife and our son, Raymond. And Kevin, I'm completely exhausted. I can't even read the menu. I'm just absolutely beat, right? And I'm like, why am I so tired? And it kind of like dawned on me. It's like, hey, dude, man, your physical well-being is more than just your physical self, and you've just been kind of focused on this being this cancer fighter, right? And that was your physical side, but you're neglecting your mental side, your emotional side, your spiritual side, and as a musician, I was readily, drew the metaphor to a mixing board in the studio, that as a guitar player, more guitar, less of everything else. But, I recognized the fact that, here I was so focused on working out, my nutrition and all that, that I was kind of neglecting the rest of my whole being. And it was kind of, it dragged me down, strengths in any one of those areas, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, for me, can lift maybe ones that are lagging. But there also, the inverse is true. The laggards can, pull down maybe some of my strengths. So, I learned something about myself that night, Kevin. And so I kind of, thought like, what else can I learn? How can I approach my fight against cancer with like a sense of discovery? A beginner's attitude, go at it and learn from it. And, one of the things I decided soon thereafter is to revisit a timeline exercise that I had facilitated as part of a trainer of a time management course when I was with Sony Electronics. And a timeline exercise, actually, I want the audience to do it right now with me. It's very easy to do. You just, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, get it out, but you don't. It's a simple exercise. You can just do it in your mind. And that is you draw a horizontal line from left to right. And on the left-hand side, make a little vertical tick mark. And on the right-hand side, make another vertical tick mark. So those of you who remember geometry in school, you just create a line segment, right? Now, underneath the left-hand side, that tick mark, write the letter B, and that's going to represent your birth. And you guys are all smarter than me, so I already know what the left-hand side is. Left-hand side, so when you're already there, you've already written down the letter D, and that represents your death. So that's your time on the planet. That's your timeline. And, the introspective part comes is that while we all intellectually know that tomorrow's not promised, where do you believe in your heart, in your head? Where do you believe you are on your timeline? Right. And so, Kevin, for years, facilitating this exercise, I would just kind of haphazardly throw my tick mark right in the middle because, man, I was going to live forever. And if it wasn't going to be forever, it's going to be at least 100. But here I am as a newly diagnosed cancer patient in 2019 at 54 years old, 55 by the time I did this exercise. I being intellectually honest, I kind of had to, my tick mark was further to the right, and so like, what did that mean to me? What does this mean by looking at this, my tick mark further to the right? And it, I come to the realization, Kevin, like a lot of humans, I think I've been guilty too often in the past of taking time for granted. I would take all tomorrow's, next week's, next month, next year, sometimes depending on the topic of conversation, the theme, maybe decades, I just take for granted, right? And further looking at that, it's like, okay, if taking time for granted, if I'm guilty of doing that, what else? Well, what else is that, because of that, because I took time for granted, I took people and relationships for granted too. Right. So, it's my dear friend, Kevin, I'm thinking about him, but, Kevin's going to be here tomorrow. I won't be here tomorrow. I'll get in touch with him tomorrow or next week. And next week turns into next month, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these are things that
That's right.
lot of the audience out here can kind of relate to. Right. So again, I am a musician. We do gigs. One way to make more money at gigs is to come up with a cool T-shirt. T-shirt's got the logo on the front and some pithy saying in the back. So I'm always kind of looking for a saying to put on the back of a T-shirt. And looking at that, it was, the saying came up, and I've used it already in this episode, is if not now, when? Right? This is, by looking at my timeline exercise, I was able to refocus my energy on the things that meant most to me, what I wanted to get accomplished, and who I wanted to do all these things with. What do I want to do, and who do I want to do it with? That came from the timeline exercise. It led me to talking to my friend Tom Olenek about his idea for a book called It's Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. That's my first book, and it's co-written with him. But, also that if not now, when mentality, Kevin, that led me to the Indy 500 book. I wanted to update this book of Hal Higdon's great book about the 1970 race, but a lot has changed in the sport, a lot has changed in the event, and so I thought to myself, at the conclusion of the 2023 race, I'm like, you know what? If not now, when? How about, a taste of your own medicine? I used that expression with Tom to be the catalyst to get, the Immaculate book written. How about take a dose of your own medicine? If not now, when? Let's do it for the 2024 race. And so I'm, got to work on it, and I'm proud of how the book came out. I hope you're enjoying it, and thank you so much for picking it up.
Absolutely. Well, and this is one of those things. And C7 Gear Over fans, you get more than just racing stories here. You get some fantastic life advice, and you didn't even. And don't worry, I'm not going to charge you anything extra for it. It's free because I'm a giver. This is what we do here at 7th Gear Over. But the other cool thing, and actually, as like we talked offline, Ray, sometimes when we get one topic or one question going on, it sparks thoughts for another several
Mhm. Yeah.
iterations of questions. And to your point about following your own advice about if not now when, and trying to recreate that great book that stood out from your youth, you know I think you and I had talked about this when we talked on the phone, is that one of the things that I would like to do with my show is, and I'm sure you remember this from your time in Indy, and even when you weren't here in Indy, the great Donald Davidson, and how at the end of practice days and qualifying days, he always used to do the radio bit on, not bit, but segment on I think it was WIBC, about the talk of Gasoline Alley, where he would kind of recap, stories, and people would call in and ask questions. And of course, with the photographic memory that Donald's got, he could give you statistics and particulars and anecdotes that you'd have to file through, numerous, files and libraries and that kind of thing. But I think it would be cool for the 7th Gear Over show to bring back Talk of Gasoline Alley live at the Speedway during the qualifying and or race weekends at the 500, and just live stream it and have people come join us and tell stories, and we'll see who's there. Maybe we grill up some Kraus meats to get the scent going to draw the fans over even more. But I think stuff like that, to your point, is like, if not now, when?
Yeah, Kevin, we're going to do it this year. I have zero influence at the Speedway and things like that, but I'm certainly collaborating with you, JD, and others on your team, and we're going to make it happen this year. Live updates, recorded updates, it don't matter. Updates from the Speedway, right outside the Pagoda, in Gasoline Alley, wherever we can do it. And if we have to do it guerrilla style, we're going to do it guerrilla style. So, yeah, let's make it happen this year.
I think we got a few connections there with the SPMJ that maybe they can help grease the skids here and help us make that happen.
I think we might be able to leverage some relationships, but I'm also not opposed to, there's a member in the SPGA, Bobby C from New York, and one of his gigs is New York Radio. He has done, what he can at the Speedway, just, with a recorder and a microphone, and going out and just not taking no for an answer.
There you go. Exactly. Sometimes you just got to look like you know what you're doing, and you'd be surprised at how far you get.
And you certainly know what you're doing. So so that should be easy to do, right?
Well, it's like I told you offline, I know just enough to get myself into trouble. So at least I can fake it pretty well. So as you're writing the book, Ray, how how in touch with some of the players were you able to get as you were writing this? I know a lot of that was just sort of your chronicling and storytelling, again, which I find amazing that you did. But were you able to get a little bit closer than you thought with some of the personalities throughout that whole lead up and then into the race itself?
Yeah, closer to, in closer contact with folks than maybe I would have thought for some, and then surprisingly, lack of contact and follow up from others. And I don't know, how much you've worked with various, IndyCar teams and their communications folks, but the level of professionalism, quite frankly, is surprising for me, particularly a guy with a public relations background, right? The inquiries that would not get returned, even voicemails, but voicemail mailboxes that were too full to accept messages. I experienced that with a race winning team last year. And not literally not being able to get in contact with somebody, it's their job. There was actually, Kevin, there's a race last year. This organization won a race. For much of the year, they didn't have a working website, so it's still kind of, it's still kind of weird. But yeah, at the same time, I'd have the drivers themselves answer their own emails. So yeah, it was a kind of a weird dichotomy of accessibility from surprisingly a lot of accessibility and insight to shockingly lack of follow up and accessibility.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ray, because as I'm getting a little bit, further into that IndyCar community, I was just at the IndyCar Content Days here in downtown Indianapolis last week. All their preseason stuff, the Fox folks, them taking their photos for the press guides and all that stuff, and I kind of experienced similar things just from that perspective. Not necessarily the PR reps from the different teams responding or not responding, but it was like some of how the assembled media that was there for those interviews either were treated, or the access and the influence that they thought they had versus what they had, and kind of how they treated others was a little bit surprising to me, much like it was you when with the experiences that you had. But as you wrote that book, and you kind of, and now especially as they always say, hindsight is always 2020, right? what what are the parts of the book, of your book in particular, obviously, that really stood out to you, that really had particular meaning, perhaps more than others? And I get it's kind of like trying to say, which of your children is your most favorite, but
Yeah.
were there any particular points in the book that were maybe a little bit closer to heart or meant a little bit more to you than maybe some others?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the things that I enjoyed the most were kind of digging back a little bit into to history. So telling the story about the Speedway and how the Speedway, the creation of the Speedway, but then how the Speedway has grown, faced challenges through its well over 100-year history. So I like digging into that. I liked. There's a chapter in the book about Joseph Newgarden, who was the 2023 winner, how his face was, the revealing of his face on the Borg Warner Trophy. So that allowed me to dig into, the history of the Borg Warner Trophy, and I found that to be, interesting, right? And then as I introduced to drivers, I didn't, as drivers became named to teams, and like, this driver will be entered in the Indy 500, coming next year and so forth. That was like, this book kind of started out as a diary. In fact, that was the subtitle originally. This book is entitled The Indy 500, A Year-Long Quest to Win the Greatest Spectacle in Racing. The original subtitle was like a diary or a daily diary of the greatest spectacle in racing. So, as I would have these diary entries of, notable things, like, a driver was announced, and, as for example, the, Andretti Global announcing that Marco Andretti would be entered in the Indy 500, going through the history of, like, I just don't want to say Marco Andretti is going to be an entrant in the 500. Let's talk about his history in the Indy 500. I think at the time that would have been his 19th race. Like, what's his history? And you can't talk about that, like I said, without talking about Michael and Mario and Aldo and others, right? So that was those things were kind of interesting for me. So as I introduced different aspects of the race, kind of digging into the history, not just what's happening today with the driver, the team, or so forth, but a little bit about the history. I want to give the reader, the idea of I wanted to give the reader an idea of, Marco battling his dad for victory in the Indy 500 in the closing laps of his rookie season race. I mean, that was incredible, right? And he almost won it as a rookie. He lost, for those of you who are not familiar, lost to Sam Hornish by a whisper. Amazing race. I think his father finished third that year.
Yeah, that was a gut punch of a race. And yeah, there's
gut punch for the
I appreciate you.
Gut punch for the Andretti's. It was a life-changing
sure.
event for Sam Hornish, right?
Or Sam Hornish, right? Exactly. All right, Ray, I want to get a little bit more in depth with you on to what we're seeing right now for the upcoming IndyCar season, but we'll do that right after these couple of announcements here. First of all, again, these episodes would not be possible here in the 2026 season, our seventh season. See what I did there? Seventh year over Rev, seventh season. Without our great friends and partners over at Respect Your Package and Dick Carriers, makers of those high-end men's briefs, complete with ball bustier technology, the most supportive underwear on the market. In fact, we're going to have the CEO of Respect Your Package on one of our next upcoming episodes. But if you go to their website and you put in the promo code RESPECT7, you will actually get 20% off of your order, not to be combined with any other sales or promos that are going on. But go ahead and check out Respect Your Package. They are respectfully scandalous yet unapologetic. And then also we have something close to my heart here, those great meats over at krausemeats.com. Always top quality since 1923, with an expanded menu of offerings on their website, shipping throughout the continental United States. It's a family legacy that goes back over 100 years. I invite you to check it out, especially as you're getting ready for your summer and spring grilling needs. All right. Along with that, folks, if you like what you've been hearing on the Seventh Year Over Rev show, these great conversations we're having with these phenomenal people like Ray today, by all means, make sure you're sharing us with your friends, liking us, hitting that subscribe button here on YouTube to help us grow that subscription base. That's really the goal here, so we can get more eyes on us and get to be able to do even more fantastic content, like what we were just talking about with Ray about maybe doing some live streams from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway this May, as well as other things. So again, go ahead and smash that subscribe button, because if you're not, what the hell are you waiting for? I mean,
Yeah,
come
what
on,
are you waiting
we're
for,
having a good
people?
time here. We're having a great time here. So, all right, Ray, you and I had a great conversation on the phone a week ago when we got acquainted with each other. And obviously, we're both big IndyCar fans, big motorsports fans in general, Formula One, as you mentioned about with your affinity for Ferrari. But with some of the news that's come out this last week, I'm really curious to get your take on some of this stuff. The first of which I feel like has kind of gone under the radar, the whole Team Penske thing. Last year, with the attenuator gate, they dismissed Tim Cindric, Ron Rzuski, and Kyle Moyer. Tim Cindric kind of went on gardening leave, right? Like they say in
Yeah,
Formula One. He went on gardening leave. Kyle Moyer went on to McLaren. Rzuski is now with Andretti Global. And lo and behold, last week, breaking news, Tim Cindric is back as strategist for Scott McLaughlin on the number 3 car.
yeah.
Weird, huh? How did that happen? Somehow, I really don't think that he missed a paycheck from the captain. Do you?
Yeah, I don't know. I was so disappointed last year. I know Roger Penske owns the IndyCar series. I know he owns the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but I also know in his heart he doesn't view himself as an owner. He views himself as a steward of something that's way bigger than him, right? You and I, Kevin, our hearts and the hearts of millions of people, we own the Indianapolis 500. And I was just so extraordinarily disappointed in a bunch amongst other things. One of the things I had to question, and I kept asking people, and nobody gave me the answer, was like, how technical is technical inspection when this stuff has been going on for a week and a half, right? It's plainly obvious. And then it's weird from a Penske perfect perspective that 2 cars have it, but the 3rd car doesn't have it. If there's one shop that you expect to have, standardized operating procedures, it's that particular shop, right? And so, that on top of the whole push to pass scandal from the year before, man, I was like, you got to do something, right? And so, sure enough, within a couple of days, Cindric and the folks were dismissed, and that wasn't something to be taken lightly. Those are 3 dudes that everybody in the paddock certainly wants to have, right? So I don't know. Was Tim associated with the team last year or not? I do know that his gig with McLaughlin and the number 3 team is really kind of a part-time gig. It's supposedly just race weekends, right? So giving Tim a chance to I think has expressed a desire to maybe not be a full-time guy, full-time in this sport. It's like 60, 70 hours a week, right? So maybe not, but it was super interesting. I do think that this is a big year for the 3 team and McLaughlin, right? He had a horrible year last year. Some of it was his own doing, some of it was not his doing, but certainly not up to his expectations. And that is a seat that carries a lot of expectations, right? So I think this needs to be a big year. But man, Tim Cindric has been there, done that from a strategist role, right? He has made a lot of right calls, has won a lot of races, including the biggest race of them all. So that was certainly big news that came out last week. And surprising. Of all the teams that you're coming back to, they're coming back to an organization where he didn't run IndyCar. He ran all of Penske Motorsports. So it was a big step down, and now it's a big step back up.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I put that out on social media, a little while back about that whole thing, trying to get, what people think, because you're going to have those people that are like, oh, he's a cheater, the push to pass deal from St. Pete, now you got the attenuator gate. And to your point, yeah, and I love what you said, because I say that phrase all the time, Penske perfect, right? That's how I always try to model my early racing career. And if you want to benchmark yourself against anybody, who better than Penske? So that whole deal last year year was so uncharacteristic. Like you said, why did two cars have it and the other one didn't? But then I was also to the point of like, when it happened, why are you on pit lane grinding away on the filler that you put in the attenuator? And like, if you thought that there was a question, why not just go back to the garage area, close the door, and skip that qualifying run and not put yourself out there for everybody to see? Which was to me very un-Penske like. But you had a good
I think
point that
for
McLaughlin had a
my
horrible
opinion,
year.
yeah, my opinion on that
Yeah,
whole
go
thing
ahead.
was that it wasn't a performance type of thing. It was let's make this look better. And I think even when they were trying to recover from it, it's like, okay, it's not going to look better, but we'll take this we'll take this little seal off to comply by regulations. So that's where I think the impetus came from. The disappointing aspect is that you know better. I mean, Penske perfect. I mean, the cosmetic thing flies, right? I mean, Penske was known for that in the early '70s. It's like gone are the grease monkey days. This is polished corporate. There was not a nicer looking car in 1972 at the Indianapolis 500 than Mark Donohue's car. I mean, that thing was always polished, right? And so they really changed the whole aspect of it. But it was the idea that you should know, particularly a shop like Penske's, Penske perfect. You should know that you're not allowed to touch this thing, make it look better or not. This is one part of the car you cannot touch, and then like we both said, how can two cars do it but not the third car? Operationally, you would that's a shop that every damper that's built is similar for each of the three cars on the team. It's not like one car, the three has a different damper than the two or what have you. So yeah, it was disappointing, but yeah, big news. And like you said, like we both said, this is a big year for Scott McLaughlin. Let's he was going up, and now his trajectory has been going down. So let's course correct it.
I know, especially the start of the 500 when he crashed on the warm-up lap. I mean, talk about adding, rubbing salt in the wound for an already difficult month. I mean, he had the big crash earlier on in the month. So yeah, this is going to be a big deal. So maybe it's all hands on deck, and certainly the stakes are now raised now that Malukas has come in to take over Will Power's seat. So there's going to be some youth challenges there, I'm sure. But then moving on from that, Ray, we also then the very next day had the news about the executive order that the president signed to bring an IndyCar race to basically the National Mall in the Capitol at the end of August to help celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. What are your thoughts on having a race there?
It sounds great, but my stomach has been, I kind of need antacids, and I'm not even associated with the organization, right? I mean, what I'm flashing back to, Kevin, is the kart race in San Jose, California, over a decade ago.
Oh, with the manhole covers coming off and the railroad
manhole
tracks and all
covers
that
coming
fun
off,
stuff.
catching air over the light rail trails. I mean, it was a disaster. It came back for another year, but everybody involved in the sports knows how difficult it is just to organize an event with Marshall, just to be able to run an event on an existing track. That takes time for a debut event. Where you still have to design the track and get the pavement ready for the physical stresses of an Indy car, and then to organize everything that goes around it, conduct the event, and do it all in 7 months. I can't even imagine. There's going to be so many sleepless nights for so many people just to try to get this through. It's a super ambitious project. It's going to be, I think, awesome. Just the visuals of being, cruising through the mall in DC and the monuments, and the visuals of a car race already are impressive. But to add that to it, it's going to be, sort of like the Formula One in Las Vegas, and the visuals that come from that.
Agreed. And I think if I am reading the tea leaves correctly, my guess is that there was probably some sort of sketches, rough ideas for the road course already in play before this finally got announced. But to your point, the logistics of this, really putting it all together. But at the same time, it's a Penske organization, and who better to put together a massive event like this than the Penske Corporation and IMS Productions. So
I also like to compare it to the Arlington race. And when was the think about when the first Arlington race was announced. that's typically the kind of leeway that you would give. Well over a year that we're going to,
Yeah.
come to this event, particularly a street course. And so now they're going to do it in 7 months. And yeah, there might be some leadways. The Arlington event, you're dealing with a parking lot. It's much different than public streets. You thinking about what they had to do in Las Vegas to repave the streets and take a little bit of the crown out of it. I've never driven in DC. I've only taken the big red bus around to monuments and Ubers and things like that. So I'm not an expert on the pavement and around the mall, but that's certainly one of the considerations is how do we get this street ready to race 200-mile-an-hour race cars on. But it's going to be exciting. It certainly won't be a lack of effort and a lack of news coming from that.
That's for sure. That's definitely going to raise the profile. But I think, you and I are about the same age, Ray, and I'm sure you remember the old Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons that we watched when we were kids. I feel like this is one of those, hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. Again, that trick never works, about how to put together an event here in 6 months' time. But anyway, all right, moving on from my, as I digress here into childhood cartoons. But from what you saw leading through the end of last year, I want to get your thoughts on what you see coming down the pike here for the 2026 IndyCar season in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about Formula One, and we'll wrap up with a couple of things more about the SPMJ and your band.
Yeah, well, so to talk about 2026 and 2025, you alluded to maybe perhaps, Romain Grosjean coming back into the series with the final coin entry. I have to say, man, can anybody feel more worse for Linus Lundqvist than he doesn't get enough. He doesn't get enough pity. Here's a guy that doesn't have the funding to go racing, but he is a winner and has been a winner every place he's ever been. And I when I talk to like some casual fans, names like Lance Stroll come up, and it's like, come on, motorsports say these people aren't deserving of it, and said, well, it's your definition on deserving or not. But if there is one dude that really deserves a seat in an Indy car, it's Linus Lundqvist. We're looking at a guy who in just one full-time season IndyCar, won a pole and appeared on the podium. That's a lot better than a lot of other racers. Now it's still his rookie season. So I, feel for the guy who became kind of a victim of, the charter system in IndyCar, right? Coming into 2026, this is a time of year, Kevin, that it's just so exciting. It's like a baseball fan for spring training, right? And hope abounds for everybody, right? And so if you're a motorsport fan, we just had the Daytona 24 hours just last weekend, right? And we're going to have the Daytona 500 coming up. I think today, the day of our recording, we got the NASCAR Clash coming up, and we got IndyCar starting. Formula One has already tested their cars for the first time. So it's all this excitement. There's so much hope, right? And so I look at all the hopes and the hopefuls that we have coming up in 2026 in IndyCar. I don't know how much fans might have a whole lot of hope. I'm curious about the teams, and we already talked about Alex Palou and Chip Ganassi Racing. That Chip Ganassi Racing is the best team in IndyCar because of Alex Palou, but Alex Palou is also with a team that might be the best team in IndyCar Racing even without him, right? And they seem to be unstoppable. There's a mistake at Mid-Ohio last year from him, but he still finished second. And his teammate, Scott Dixon, finished first. He got punted out of the Detroit race. But when the chips were down, Alex Palou won it all. And I don't see how he's not the prohibitive favorite to win it all again, right? So I'm excited to see, how well is Palou going to do, but also, how are the other teams going to respond? The teams clearly have, him as the bullseye. You have to race Palou, and there doesn't seem to be a weakness, whether it's qualifications, race day, oval track, street course, natural terrain, road course. Guys, not just strong, he's almost dominant in every place. So looking forward to seeing how the other teams attack him. Looking forward to seeing how David Malukas does with a big time spotlight on him. He was going to have that spotlight a couple of years ago to McLaren, but never really had an opportunity there. So the spotlight doesn't, I think, get any bigger. Stepping in there, it's going to be super interesting to see how Will Power merges in and assimilates into the Andretti spot. That team for me, lately they've been very masterful on the street courses, and they just have a good street course setup. They've been kind of good in qualifying at times, but they've been woefully inconsistent. And that there's been mistakes on pit lane. There's been kind of engineering types of mistakes. There was a while there, not a few years ago, they were trying to run 5 cars, and I always thought that they were just spreading themselves too thin. Now we've concentrating in on 3 cars, so it'd be interesting to see if they're continuing their progress forward. And then, one of the things that I think you and I have, talked about, via typed words, it's the Indy 500. I'm dying to see if there's going to be 34 entries or 33 entries, and what's coming up. It doesn't look good for having a bump day at Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is always better when there's more than 33 cars in it.
100%. And as you're saying those things, Ray, I'm thinking of some other stuff here. We talked about the increased spotlight from Lucas now that he's in one of the plum seats. I remember asking this question to Scott Dixon at the Content Days last week about what makes Alex Palou so damn good. I said, did you inadvertently teach him the one lesson that he had to learn at Mid Ohio? And he said no. He sees him all the time. He sees his level of preparation. He sees what he does both in the car and out of the car. And the guy is just strong in every facet. And yeah, everybody else is going to have to basically step up their game. So it just goes to show you how tight and how small the margins are in IndyCar racing. Because literally with the depth of talent in the series, you could have 16 different winners out of 20 different cars on any given weekend. And then, talking about how you mentioned Will Power and see how he fares and trying to, not trying to make the captain regret having only offered him a 1-year contract. But let's not forget, when we talked earlier, Ron Rzuski, one of those that got fired from Penske last year with the attenuator gate, is now at Andretti Global, reunited with Will Power. So maybe there's a little bit of magic that can be rekindled there. And to your point about bump day at Indianapolis, sounds to me like Prem has already confirmed that they're not going to be at the preseason test in Phoenix. So it makes me more than a little skeptical unless they've got an 11th hour buyer to have that team ready to go for St. Pete and beyond. So I think you're going to be pretty close to spot on there, Ray, in terms of bumping at the 500, unless something great happens.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
let's talk
25 full-time entrants, right? So we need to find, come on, people out there. We need funding for 9 others to get bump day, because bump day is so much drama associated with just trying to qualify for the Indy 500.
Think about that book, right? Chronicling the 1970 Indy 500. How many entrants did they have in 70 for bump day? I mean, it was not uncommon back in the day to have 80 entries, even if they didn't all have drivers assigned to them. But you had bumping for a long, long time. And that was part of the drama and part of what drew people there, because that's, again, when you got to hear the stories and you got to see these guys trying to carry cars that really had no business being carried.
Yeah, remember, it wasn't that long ago either. You can think back, 20, 30 years, Penske not being able to qualify for the 500 with Immo and Al Jr. Bobby Rahal once got bumped from it. But, you'd have, 4 or 5 cars, even just 30 years ago, that would have a, very real chance of making the race. But, even the drama of the last handful of years, just having one car being bumped, and having 4 cars, shooting it out for the final 3 spots. It is so much drama. But yeah, I bump day makes qualifying. I like looking at the back end of the field more so than the front end of the field. For winning the pole at Indianapolis, the check that comes along with it is bigger than most drivers get for any race victory that they've ever achieved. But my attention always on that second day of qualifying now at Indianapolis is the back row. Who makes the greatest race in the world? Who makes the greatest spectacle in racing? And who pulls yourself up by the bootstraps, the driving shoes, and tries again next year.
Right. I mean, think about just, what was it last year with Jacob Abel, not being able to put it in there, or just not that long before that, where I think it was Pippa Mann, our friend Pippa, bumped out Fernando Alonso. There's
I think it was Kyle Kaiser who bumped out
Kyle Kaiser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you're right.
He's a 2-time F1 champion, doesn't make the race. The story, that's the Indianapolis 500 filled with stories, of people giving it their all just to start the race, right? And there's been less than 1,000 people. Barely 800 people have driven in the Indianapolis 500 in its long, illustrious history. It is an absolute privilege to be able to qualify for that race, and the drama in making it is one of the things that has captured my attention for ever since I became a fan 50 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking of Fernando Alonso, they just wrapped up basically 5 days of shakedown testing out in Barcelona. And there's lots of stories out there. Of course, Ferrari is looking like they're a little bit sharper. It seems like Lewis Hamilton's a little bit more comfortable with his new engineer there. You got George Russell saying he's going to contend for a championship. You got Adrian Newey's first complete his design Aston Martin. You got Cadillac doing some shakedown stuff.
Yeah.
You got McLaren being trying to carry the number one on that nameplate, and not to mention Red Bull and all the changes there. What have you seen? What stands out to you in terms of the preseason testing thus far, Ray?
Yeah, I love Formula One. I'm sort of like upset that Formula One's got to be so popular because of the Drive to Survive series that people like the casual fan now it's like Formula One focus. It's like, dudes, don't forget about IndyCar. IndyCar is awesome, right? But the thing that caught my attention is spookily for a member of the Tifosi like myself is Mercedes' strong start. Mercedes. It reminds me of not 2014 when new hybrid power units came into play, but more like 2017 or so when first day of testing, Mercedes got to their program by lunchtime and they started running race simulations in the afternoon of the first day. Typically in Formula One, there's a lot of technical gremlins that come up, and here, midway through that era of rule set, Mercedes was running race sims on the first day. They put in 500 laps just themselves. They're also the power unit manufacturer for a couple of three other teams, so they look to be ready to go. From a reliability perspective, for the new power unit, new chassis, I wouldn't expect any reliability issues. In a week and a half in Bahrain for the first, public test with timing and scoring, we'll see just how fast they are. But for a Ferrari fan like myself, it looks like this might be a pretty good year to be a Silver Arrows fan.
Yeah, so you and I both know, Ray, that whether it's IndyCar, like Indy 500 qualifying, or preseason testing in F1, or even like the roar before the 24 for the sports cars, somebody's always sandbagging. So
Yeah.
who do you think on the F1 side sandbagging at the moment? You think it's Aston? You think it's Red Bull? What do you think?
No, I was disappointed. First of all, I cannot believe that Williams couldn't even put their car together to make the show. I know they said they could have, but they didn't, which means they couldn't have. To give up 3 days of running, the Aston Martin really only had 1 day of running. So I was a little disappointed that they put it in. If I had to, maybe pick a sandbagger of the bunch, Red Bull's kind of flying under the radar. They had great reliability with their new Ford engine, which is pretty exciting. Maybe let's see how fast the Red Bull is. I have begrudgingly over the years, come to the realization that Max Verstappen is like a generational talent. He may be the best racer who's ever been in Formula One. Just his body of work has just kept getting better and better and better and better year over year. So let's see what he can do with a new car. And it seems like they've had a really successful shakedown of the new Ford power unit.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Red Bull in Max Verstappen, you either love him or hate him. I don't know that there's much in between in terms of whether you love or hate Max Verstappen. But I have said for a number of seasons now, and I still feel this way: the worst seat in Formula One is being the number 2 to Max Verstappen.
Yeah,
I don't care if you're Danny Ricciardo or who you are. I'd rather drive for Cadillac or Sauber or Audi, now, or Haas than being number 2 to Verstappen at Red Bull. It's just
and think
unbelievable.
of Isaac
Maybe
Hadger's
with the new cars.
Think of
Yeah.
Isaac Hadger's headspace. I mean, he's already got the pressure, and he's seen in front of him great racing drivers. Sergio Perez, at the end of his tenure at Red Bull, looked horrible, right, compared to Max Verstappen, and he's a great race driver, right? And so you look at Isaac Hadger; he's all excited to get in there. His second day in the car, second day of testing, he spins it around, wrecks the car. They lose the whole afternoon of testing. So I'm interested in seeing where his headspace is going to be. He is certainly his confidence is taking a hit. And that's not the way I think you want to start off your tenure as Max Verstappen's teammate is, wrapping it around a retaining wall, as opposed to just putting the miles in. So, yeah, it's, and, when Max Verstappen first came on the scene, I was one of those guys that's like, man, things just come too easy for him. He's driving a Formula One car at 17. I mean, how jealous can everybody in the rest of the world be? And then he, quickly moves into the Red Bull seat. He wins his first race at Red Bull. It's like, things are just happening too easy. But over the decade that he's been in Formula One, it's just like, wow, this guy is the real deal, right? So yeah, pity the teammate that has to sit alongside him.
Well, and it's interesting too, kind of thinking about that at the IndyCar content days last week. I was listening to Marcus Armstrong talk, and it was interesting because a lot of the drivers were asked, what their off-season routine was and how they got ready, and they all said to various degrees, "Oh, I'm in the best shape ever," all this other stuff. That's okay, great. That's your corporate speak, but how many of them either went and raced go-karts over the winter, or they raced other forms of motorsports over the winter time. And Armstrong made the comment, and I thought this was really interesting, and I appreciate it from a driver standpoint. He said, it's really interesting because as I was racing, and I think he was running go-karts, he said, you can tell by the way they drive what country they're from. And he's like, he was racing against one guy, and he said, come to find out he was Dutch, and it's not Verstappen, but he's like, yep, I could see that he's Dutch, or this guy's from Germany or from wherever. He's like, oh, well, he just thought it was very interesting that you could tell where the drivers were from based on how they raced. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's the first time I've heard a driver make that comment. And I thought that was very insightful.
Yeah, I'd like to explore that a little bit more. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to talk to him and say, hey, like, give me the tells. What's a French racer? What's an Italian racer?
Right. Well, the French drivers will probably be the ones if you're not LM pros, the French drivers will probably just kind of casually let you by, right? Isn't that? There it goes.
Anyway, I'm curious about what Alpine's going to be in Formula One. They seem to be just a dumpster fire organizationally, and but they've got a Mercedes PowerPoint in the back of their unit. I think Pierre Gasly's he's a really good driver, but he's just saddled down with a team that, I don't even understand why Renault owns them anymore. Getting out of the power plant business, and then having Briatore as the team principal, he had success way back in the day with Benetton, but that's sort of like the rooster taking credit for the dawn, perhaps with the design team he had, Michael Schumacher. Yeah, so
sure. And it wasn't all that long ago that Flavio was banned from F1 paddocks because of stuff that he did. So, but I guess there's some loose rumors connecting Christian Horner to Alpine. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, my friend, we have been chatting for quite a while, but before we wrap up, I would be remiss if we didn't talk at least a little bit more about how it came to be that you became not just a member of the Society of Professional Motorsports Journalists, but how you found yourself on the board and what that all means to you and what those new responsibilities are as a board member. So kind of walk us through that, because quite frankly, I don't even know how I got accepted to be on the SPMJ.
In writing the book, the Indy 500, I was like, I need some endorsements. I need to, contact people who, that are respected in the industry or respected in the sport, and maybe they can write a little, see a draft of my manuscript, write a little blurb for it. And I'm like, who should I get? And I thought, I know, Paul Page. It's like, well, how do I get a hold of Paul Page? And so I gave it a shot on Facebook. I looked up Paul Page on Facebook. I'm like, that's Paul Page right there. So I sent Paul Page a message through Facebook Messenger and said, hey, Paul, I'm just a writer writing a book about the Indy 500, but I would love it if you took a preview of the manuscript, and if you felt comfortable about it, writing an endorsement for it. So, sure enough, that endorsement's on the back cover because he did like the book
I
and he did
noticed.
write the endorsement.
Yeah.
And there's no better, no better endorsement I can possibly get than that of Paul Page, this legendary broadcaster and a member of multiple Hall of Fames, including the Broadcasting Hall of Fame. Cut to the chase. Paul is a founding member of the Society of Professional Motorsports Journalists, and he said, "Hey, you should join. You consider joining." And I'm like, if Paul Page says, consider joining, I'm definitely considering joining. And that's sort of what led to the board seat. He said, would you be interested in the board? And I'm like, if you tell me to be interested in the board, I'm interested in being the board because you are Paul Page, and what you say is
Right.
what it goes. So I am a new board member of the SPMJ, my second year in the organization, and I'm kind of tasked with spreading the news for motorsports journalists and getting them involved. There's the people that we do have in the society just have this tremendous history within the sport. There's an ability to leverage the professional network within the organization, and it's also an organization that is concerned with the integrity and professionalism of motorsports journalists, right? So this is the best of the best, and my quest, Kevin, for the coming year is to go places like the Long Beach Grand Prix, go through the media center, and say, hey, we want you to be a member of the Society of Professional Motorsports Journalists. So if you're out there, whatever type of content creator you are, whether it's the written word, you have a podcast or video producer or whatever, please go visit the Society of Professional Motorsports at the website and just go to the About tab and learn about the history, learn about what the mission of the SPMJ is, and please consider joining. And you need a reference to join, so use your pal Ray as a reference, or maybe use your pal Kevin as a reference, and let's get you involved.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Ray. There's such a wealth of experience and talent and contacts and connections that can be made through that. And as I said at the top of the show, Seventh Gear Over fans, that's how Ray and I got connected, was through the SPMJ. And I'm incredibly grateful for that, because this has been a fantastic discussion. And we, believe it or not, Ray, it seems like we just started talking and we've been talking for well over an hour at this point. But before we throw the checkered flags on this week's episode, because I want to have you back on, because we have so much more to talk about and I don't want to take up your entire day, but I got to ask you about that amazing guitar collection you've got behind you there hanging on the wall, because you are a musician in addition to everything else that you've done. How long you been playing? What do you play? I guess you record with, it's a two-piece band if I remember right, but
Yeah.
you've got this great Eddie Van Halen tribute folk guitar on the wall behind you that I just absolutely love. Not to mention all of your other tools of the trade back there. But so tell me about that journey, how that all plays into you being an author and you doing all this other stuff, man. I think it's
Yeah,
awesome.
it doesn't play so much into being an author, just plays into the the desire to be creative and burn off creative energies. We're actually talking, Kevin, recording this episode on a Monday. Monday for me is Music Monday, because I find myself struggling sometimes to writing so much and promoting my written works, is that I kind of get away from music. But yeah, I picked up guitar as a maybe in sixth grade way back in the day, and played it for a little while, and then it kind of slipped away. And once I picked up some other things, we always call it like when my son was involved in scouting, it was the fumes, the car fumes and the perfumes kind of distract you from paths that you might be on. So when the fumes kind of distracted me from it, and I picked up a guitar again later. Been in a variety of types of bands and the like, but maybe probably 10 years ago. I'm 61 years old out there, audience. So early 50s. I'm like, man, it's these getting started at 9 o'clock gigs are beyond me. Setting up a ton of equipment. I went to a friend of mine, a singer, and I said, I got an idea. How about just acoustic guitars? Two guys, acoustic guitars, two microphones, and we can do like a 30-minute setup, a 30-minute teardown, and we'll be a winery band, a happy hour band, a brewery band, and we'll be home by 9 o'clock as opposed to starting at 9 o'clock. And my friend Scott's like, that sounds like a really good idea. So we became the Chronic Padres, and we originated out of the Bay Area. Scott kind of ruined things a year or two ago by moving to Florida to escape income tax, state income tax in California. He's actually coming. He'll be visiting me on Sunday for the Super Bowl, and we'll plan on doing a bit of a live stream. So it's, at this point in time, Kevin, music, kind of trying to reinvent myself. I'm not exactly sure, where the Chronic Padres go as a performance band or as even a recording band. I have some demos I want to continue to record and put out. You can find our work on, wherever you stream your music. There's not a lot of it up there, but there's some of it. I hope to record some stuff, and I am working on kind of I don't know, it's an album of what it is of my fight with multiple myeloma, right? And so the songs are all around this theme and the different ebbs and flows that comes as being a cancer patient and a survivor. So I'm looking forward to cranking that out in 2026 and putting the demos up. One of the things I like to do with demos is put them up there, warts and all, and let people decide if it's any good. Is this a song that I should record with my horrible voice, or is it a song that maybe is better suited for trying to sell to somebody and they can record, or maybe it's just best to put aside and not work on any further. So enjoy getting the feedback from that, just like I enjoy getting feedback from my written works. It's like I enjoy getting feedback from readers. Do I get more? Do you want more, or do you not want more? And I'm proud of my novel, Outflanked. And I know I can write nonfiction. The Indianapolis 500 book is one of them, but I wanted to try my hand with a novel. And while it hasn't sold particularly well, the people who have read it really like it. So, it's encouraged me to write the second book. I'm really close to finishing that book.
Holy smokes, man. You are a man of the people, and yes, you do it all, and I love that. And by the way, the idea of doing the like the wine shows and the earlier shows and being in bed by 9 o'clock, that's what we in the business call a veteran move right there, my friend. So, all right, Seventh Gear Over fans, as we wrap up this week's show, Ray, for people that want to know even more about you, more about the books, more about your music, and maybe even the live stream, where can people find you?
Yeah, I love telling people you can find me on social media platforms. Just my name. My name is Ray Hartjen, RayHartjen. That's my handle on all my social media platforms. It's also my website, rayhartjen.com. One thing I really want to say, heartfelt, if you are a cancer patient, if you are a cancer patient caregiver, or if you're just a cancer patient advocate and an ally, and if there's ever anything I can do for you, please reach out and let me know. I've shared my fight with multiple myeloma, and my second book is called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. My phone number's in the book. My email address is rayhartjen@gmail.com. The honor of my life, other than raising two wonderful children with my wife, Lori, has been connecting with cancer patients, caregivers, and allies, hearing their stories and doing whatever I can to help them. So if you're in that boat, I want to hear your story. Please reach out to me. And if you want to reach out to me about anything other than cancer, also all the social platforms, my website, Gmail, it's all Ray Hartjen.
Holy smokes. See, Seventh Gear Over fans, this is what our show is about. We bring on a guest that we're going to talk racing, and you get so much more than just racing. You get some great life lessons here, some great perspective on things. And Ray, I can't thank you enough, man. This time has flown by. I could literally sit and talk with you for hours about all kinds of stuff, racing and beyond. And
Let's do it again.
I can't thank you enough.
Before we go, Kevin, question to you really fast, since we talked about the Indianapolis 500 book. Who wins the Indy 500 this year?
I was going to ask you that very same question. I think, and I don't know that I can narrow it down to the specific driver, but I think McLaren's finally going to put it together. And I'm not. My heart says Pato. My brain says maybe not Pato, because I feel like, as you know, from you and I are basically the same age. Oftentimes the speedway chooses its victor. It's not the other way around. So some of these guys, like when Marco had his chance in his rookie year and lost it in the last lap there to Penske and our boy there. Sometimes I feel like you get presented an opportunity, and if you don't take advantage of it, it never comes back again, which is why I kind of say the speedway chooses its victor. And obviously it really liked the Elio Castroneveses and the Rick Mearses and the Al Unsers and the AJ Foyts. But I think I'm going to actually skew to McLaren this year, because they've got Kyle Moyer on, they've got TK, they've made a huge investment in the facility here in town in Indianapolis. So I'm going to go with McLaren. How about you?
Interesting, and they've also got Ryan Hunter-Reay right in that fourth McLaren, right? And so
Captain
that would be,
America,
yeah. I'm
another
going to
Indy
go for the
500
Indy
winner
5.
right there.
I got a feeling for like maybe the best who's ever done it, and that for the body of his career. I'm going to go Scott Dixon as an Indy 500 champion for his second. Yeah.
That's not a bad call. I would actually really be grooving if that happened. That would be fantastic. So,
Mhm.
all right.
But
But
like you
yes,
said,
Ray,
the Speedway will decide for us.
the Speedway will tell us who it
Yeah.
wants. But Ray, I would absolutely love it if you would consider coming on back here if we didn't bore you to death with our inane questions and comments. But this has
I
been
would,
a
yeah,
fantastic chat with you.
I would love to come back. I appreciate this opportunity. I love what you're doing with the show. I'm looking forward to it growing in the seventh season, and so it's been fantastic. If your audience wants to have me back, I'm for sure coming back, and I'm for sure going to be sporting one of those really cool over seventh gear hats that you're wearing right there. So yeah.
Yes, sir. I think we might even have some T-shirts in stock too. So to that point, Seventh Gear Over Rev fans, what do you think about today's show with Ray? He's given us way more than we actually asked for, right? Between life lessons and perspectives and great insight into his book, which I highly recommend that you read. Again, you see it here. It's the Indy 500, right? With Joseph Newgarden on the front of it, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. It's great storytelling. Ray is a master at it, among many other things. So our huge thanks to Ray for being our guest this week. It's been great to get to know him, and we'll continue to forward that. But let us know. Let us know what you like about Ray and when we should have him back on next. Maybe he should be a regular contributor. He can be our F1 and our IndyCar guest analyst here from as we go week to week. So as always, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're sharing us with your friends. Don't forget about supporting our sponsors, Kraus Meats, as well as Respect Your Package. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Seventh Gear Over Rev Show, the greatest spectacle in podcasting. And for you, Ray, that also got endorsed by Paul Page. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.